This is Story Recapped. Today I'm going to explain an adventure, family, and sci-fi film called Captain Nova. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Captain Nova Kester observes and walks through a desolate place wearing a gas mask and protective gear. The monitor in her arm warns her of her depleting oxygen levels, and she is called back to their base before the carbon dioxide and methane levels turn critical. Then, Nova returns to the command center and tells a disfigured man in a wheelchair that they should leave. Nova rides a shuttle and prepares for liftoff with ADD, a small robot that isn't programmed with a sense of humor. Timo, the dispatcher, informs Nova that she's ready and counts down for launch, while the man in the wheelchair sits beside him, observing. Nova flies off into a dry atmosphere, and when she gains enough height, she witnesses the planet in a condition worse than she expects. Nova continues on course and soon enters a wormhole. She is then reminded to focus on the objective, make as little contact as possible, and change as little as possible during her secret mission. As she approaches the speed of light, her communication with mission control is lost, and ADD is prompted to alter the course. Unfortunately, all Nova can do is scream as she turns into a young girl. Meanwhile, a shooting star zips through the night sky as Nas, a local teenage boy, drives through the forest on his motorized buggy. Nas sees the bright lights of the shuttle and follows it to the crash site. Then, ADD finds him and asks him what year it is. Nas tells ADD that it's 2025 and follows the robot, finding Nova lying unconscious on the ground. Nas walks up to Nova as ADD explains that they've landed in the wrong method and coordinates. Police sirens blare nearby, so ADD asks Nas to carry Nova as they're not supposed to be found. The police approach the crash site and find the fallen shuttle, but Nas has already carried Nova to his buggy, and they immediately leave. Nas takes Nova and ADD to a factory and lays the girl on a cot behind huge rubber tires. Blood drips from Nova's nose, and Nas suggests taking her to the hospital against ADD's wishes. ADD then orders him to leave as he isn't a doctor and will be no use to them. Unfortunately, Nas is put off and leaves ADD with a still unconscious Nova. Back at the crash site, Officer Claire Luchtmeyer arrives and is met by Cohen, one of the police investigating the unusual shuttle. Meanwhile, Nas goes home to get drinking water and a first aid kit and moves carefully to avoid waking a sleeping man on the couch. Nas then leaves for the factory, narrowly missing Claire, so the man tells Claire that Nas usually hangs out in the factory. Nas goes back for Nova but only finds her astronaut gear there. Nova, transformed into a young girl, appears behind him and holds him at gunpoint. Nas tells her he only wants to help and slowly opens the first aid kit to take out a tissue for Nova's bleeding nose. Nova reluctantly accepts it and wipes off the blood. ADD then explains to Nova that her transformation into her younger self might have been a side effect of time travel. The robot also informs her that the shuttle is still operational and that they missed their drop zone, but they still have 24 hours left for their mission. As they're talking, Claire arrives and enters the factory to investigate. She finds Nova's discarded astronaut gear but then hears her car leaving, stolen by Nas and Nova. Unfortunately, she isn't able to stop them. On the road, Nova thanks Nas for his help, prompting Nas to ask questions about her and why the police are looking for her. Nas adds that he doesn't mind helping, but he wants to know what's going on. ADD stops Nova from saying anything, reminding her that they don't exist, so Nova doesn't reveal her identity and mission, but tells Nas that she'll give him all their money if he helps take her to her destination. Nas reaches out, but Nova pulls back and tells him to keep following the road. Nas doesn't respond, so she repeats herself. And finally, Nas quips about not hearing her because they supposedly don't exist. Meanwhile, Claire takes Nas' buggy and Nova's gear back to the police facility as evidence. The following morning, Cohen and Claire explain to the colonel and other military officials that, although the shuttle came from outside the Earth's atmosphere, the pilot left human fingerprints inside. The identical fingerprints vary in size, indicating that they are from one person at different ages. However, all the prints are fresh, and they match them to a 12-year-old girl. On the road, Nova watches the lush landscape through the car windows and asks Nas what he'll do with the money. Nas jokes at first, refusing to say anything until Nova spills first, but then explains wanting to visit his dad in South America. Then, Nova notices his sad expression when she asks if his mother is also coming, so she doesn't ask anymore. The car's engine suddenly emits smoke, forcing them to pull over. Luckily, a man, Alton, passes by and offers to tow their vehicle and help fix it at his home, so Nas accepts the offer despite Nova and ADD's hesitation. Upon reaching Alton's home, the man introduces them to his wife Marhan, who is tending to a vegetable garden. Alton takes Nas with him to fix the car, leaving Nova and Marhan in the garden. Nova is amazed to see the growing plants, and Marhan tells her they just sow and let Mother Nature do the rest. Meanwhile, Claire visits the teenage Nova's home, where her parents tell her they've all been together at home last night. Claire looks at Nova's room, sees her interest in astronomy, and asks if Nova ever took flying lessons. However, since she hasn't, they are all taken to the army base for more questioning. Back in Alton's yard, Alton and Nas finish fixing the car, and the two are invited inside for dinner. Nova devours her food quickly, with ADD urging her to take in more vitamins from it. Marhan inquires about Nova's outfit, and if Nas actually has a driver's license. So Nas makes up a story about Nova being a goth and lies that he has a license. As they eat, a news broadcast of Nas and Nova comes up on TV, suspecting Nas of kidnapping the girl. The older couple takes a moment, and then Alton takes Nas upstairs. Marhan asks Nova if she was kidnapped, but Nova only says it's the other way around and continues eating. Upstairs, Alton gives Nas some clothes and asks him to try them on. Meanwhile, Claire and Cohen observe the teenage Nova in a holding room and wonder if they're dealing with an identical clone. However, they can't figure out why someone with such advanced technology would make two identical girls. Claire interrogates the teenage Nova, and Nova tells her she wants to be either a fighter pilot or an astronaut when she grows up. Eventually, the police arrive at Alton's home, so Nas and Nova flee, thinking the couple snitched on them. Before they run away though, they stay and witness Alton covering up for them. Unfortunately, Claire's car rolls out of Alton's garage, blowing their cover, and the two escape into a cornfield. Later on, the colonel arrives, informing Claire that her car has been found. Claire then orders to send out an APB for Nova Kester. The colonel and the officer wonder why, as they already have Nova in one of the holding rooms. But Cohen explains that they believe there are two versions of Nova out there. Claire visits Alton and Marhan and questions them about the vehicle and the children. Alton says he just found the car on the side of the road, and the two deny ever seeing Nas and Nova until one of the officers finds Nas's jacket. Then, search parties are mobilized, and Claire takes a chopper to look for the children in the field. In the forest, Nas and Nova continue on foot with only an hour and a half left for the mission. However, one of the soldiers finds them, so Nova shoots him with a special gun, causing him to move in slow motion. Nova explains that he's only been put on pause for a few hours to think about his career in life. They then leave him for Claire and the others to find and continue their journey. Nas and Nova arrive at a gated property and enter through a grate on a wall. Nova leads the way to a room where officials of a company called Falcon have already started a meeting. Nova barges in, asking to talk privately with Simon Valk Jr., but Simon only tells her to speak in front of everybody. Nova urges them not to drill at the North Pole as it'll release huge quantities of methane into the atmosphere. However, they do not believe her even though she warns of unstoppable global warming that would cause extreme weather and flooding. Instead, she is mocked by Simon's father, and later, security arrives to take her and Nas outside. Nas has heard everything, so Nova divulges that her mission is to avoid a global disaster stemming from the drilling of the North Pole. ADD says it's time for Plan B, so the two secretly attach ADD under Simon's car to act as a tracking device. Back in the army base, Cohen and Claire observe the soldier that Nova hit earlier. Then, they note that while there's nothing physically wrong with him, his brain activity is extremely high. Meanwhile, the guard at Falcon Property sees Nova's APB and reports the kids, so Claire leaves to chase after Nova. Nas and Nova reach a seaside view, and Nova is mesmerized by the breathtaking scenery. She expresses that it's been a long while since she's seen the ocean. Nas misinterprets Nova's rare tenderness and leans closer to kiss her. Nova backs away, telling him she's too old for him, and reveals that she's a 37-year-old time traveler from the future. Nova explains that the drilling on the North Pole will start an environmental disaster, and 20 years from now, they'll experience great floods and extreme climate change. All water will disappear, and most life will be dead. Nas dreadfully takes it in, wondering if he'll still be alive by then. Nova apologizes for breaking the news to him, but says he deserves to know the truth. Eventually, Claire arrives at the Falcon property and learns that Nova and Nas disrupted Simon's meeting regarding the North Pole drilling. Simon has already left, so Claire views the surveillance footage and sees Nas and Nova putting ADD on the car, confirming that there are two identical Novas. Then, she rushes to follow them and updates Cohen on the phone. At Simon's house, Nova and Nas sneak in and speak with Simon. with Nova claiming to have known him for a long time. ADD then presents a hologram message from Simone's older self, the disfigured man in the wheelchair from the future. The older Simone urges the younger one to stop the drilling operation and warns that he will only regret it for the rest of his life. He earnestly tells the younger Simone that winning his father's love and validation with the success of this project is not worth losing the planet. At the end of the message, Simone only laughs, not taking the children seriously. Frustrated, Nas snatches Nova's special gun and aims it at Simone. Unbeknownst to Nas and Nova, the authorities and Claire have already arrived. Then, Nova and ADD get shot by the police as Nova tries to take the gun from Nas. Sadly, Nova helplessly lies on the floor and watches a powerless ADD. Meanwhile, Nas runs off into the woods and returns to Alton's home, where he breaks down, blaming himself for what happened to Nova. Later on, Nova is treated at the army base's infirmary. She regains consciousness, and when Claire asks how she can help, Nova reveals the truth about herself and her mission to stop the drilling operation. With this information, Claire talks to Cohen about the possibility of time travel as he tries to fix ADD. Then, Cohen mentions that the small robot and all the things they found in the shuttle appear to have been manufactured sometime in the future. Suddenly, ADD comes back to life and flies away, carrying Nova's special gun. Claire and Cohen lose ADD in the parking lot, and Claire spots Simone being released. She asks him about the drilling project, and Simone immediately gets defensive, so Claire confronts him about Nova and her environmental claims. Then, Simone's father arrives to pick him up and threatens Claire with lawsuits. Back in Alton's home, Marhan tries calling nearby hospitals to find out if Nova is being treated there. ADD appears and gives Nas Nova's special gun, telling Nas to help her get back to the future for her survival. Alton takes Nas to the base, where Nas surrenders and is taken into a holding room for questioning. As the colonel and another soldier interrogate him, Nas shoots them with the special gun and puts them on pause. Nas bravely retrieves Nova's suit and helmet from Cohen, busts Nova out into the parking lot, and brings her to the shuttle. Unfortunately, Claire realizes it's too late and only finds Nas as he watches Nova fly out into the sky. Nova returns to 2050, where the world is still a dry and desolate place. Then, Timo finds her shuttle and takes her back to their facility to recuperate. Eventually, Nova awakens and informs Timo and Simone that time travel made her younger and that Simone didn't believe her as a child. Simone urges a reluctant Nova to go back, claiming that the mission wasn't a complete failure. Then, a little boy arrives, calling her mama, and hugs her. With him is his father, a curly-haired man that Nova immediately recognizes as Nas. As it turns out, Nova has changed the future. Nova and her young son venture out into the dry and deserted Earth, where the boy finds a bird skeleton. Nova explains that it was once alive and flew through the air, and sadly tells her son that they wanted too much, more than the Earth could give. Because of that, Nova realizes what she needs to do. Nova resolves to go back in time and try again. Talking to Timo, she suggests picking up where she left off to avoid disrupting her and Nas's current future. She also tells Simone they'll have to raise the stakes. Soon, Nova returns to 2025 and arrives a minute after she left Nas and Claire in the parking lot. Claire hands the special gun to Nas and lets them go to stop Simone. On the way, several time travel shuttles fly alongside Nova's, and Nova assures Nas that although they're not coming with them, they have the same mission. They arrive at the North Pole, where the drilling operation is about to commence. As Simone's father gives a speech about bringing oil and gas to the surface, Nas and Nova close in by putting guards on pause. When the time comes to begin the drilling, Simone hesitates to push the button, wondering if Nova was right about it. Simone's father scolds him, calling him weak, and dismisses him to step aside. Nas and Nova reach Simone and his father, and Nova pleads for them to stop. Simone's father mocks Nova and proceeds to push the button, but Nova puts him on pause before he's able to. After that, Nova halts the drilling machinery as Simone falls to his knees and breaks down. Nova also means to put him on pause, but Nas stops her and says they might still need him before leaving. Back in the army base, news of several time travel shuttles appearing at different locations reaches Claire and Cohen. The shuttles turn up at places where human activities threaten the environment. Meanwhile, the same news broadcast reaches Alton and Marhan at home while Alton fixes ADD. Moments later, Nas and Nova arrive at Alton's house. Nova thanks Nas for his help and bids goodbye as she needs to return to her own time. Nova offers a handshake, but Nas pulls her into a hug instead. Sadly, she doesn't tell him that they'll meet in the future. Alton and and Marhan go outside and return ADD, who is not only fixed but is now reprogrammed to have a sense of humor. Then, the three of them watch as Nova flies to the sky and goes back to the future. Later on, Claire picks up Nas and takes him to the base for questioning. Nas tells her that the shuttles will keep coming as long as humans need to be reminded to take care of the Earth. He also tells her that the other soldiers have only been put on pause for a few hours to think about their lives and careers. Finally, he tells her that Nova has already returned to the future. Claire then takes Nas to the parking lot to return his buggy, and they both watch as the teenage Nova and her family drive away. Claire gives him a knowing look, and he goes on to follow their car.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.